Welcome everyone to this Community Development Society and Breakthrough Pioneers jointly hosted webinar on home ownership and community development for the Black community. This webinar will examine the intersection between home ownership, equity, and activism within rural Black communities in Mississippi. The speakers today will discuss how community members, advocates, and educators have created favorable solutions related to policy shifts, community development, and closing the intergenerational wealth gap. My name is Tanner Knorr, and I am a board member of the Community Development Society, chair of the Webinar and Educational Subcommittee, as well as a strong advocate for our International Student Chapter Collective through CDS. I would like to thank everyone who assisted us in making today's webinar possible, especially CDS Executive Director Tammy Baxter and co-moderators for this webinar, Dr. Shequite Wilson Johnson and Amanda Beard. Dr. Shequite Wilson Johnson is a dedicated community member, nonprofit leader, and civic engagement advocate hailing from Sunflower County, Mississippi. She is a wife and mother of 5. She holds a PhD in public administration and is committed to community development and educational equity, focusing on youth empowerment and parental engagement. Dr. Wilson Johnson holds multiple leadership roles, including board president of We Together Creating Change, board member of the Sunflower County Freedom Project, and founder and CEO of GAP Leadership Program. Her work with the GAP Leadership Program strengthens ties between schools, businesses, and organizations to support student achievement in Sunflower County. As Chief Program Officer with a Mississippi nonprofit and an adjunct professor at Mississippi Valley State University, Dr. Wilson Johnson continues to inspire the next generation through both academic and community-focused initiatives. Amanda Beard is originally from Virginia Beach, Virginia, and has traveled over 1,200 miles to start her career in store design in Bentonville, Arkansas at Walmart Inc. home office, where she is now the store space manager. Amanda holds a bachelor's in landscape architecture from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University and a master's in urban and regional planning from Jackson State University. At Jackson State, she was the former student representative for the American Planning Association Mississippi chapter. Currently in her 11-year tenure at Walmart, she has applied her dual disciplinary degrees of landscape architecture and urban and regional planning to her workspace, allowing the two to coexist in her work of elevating the needs of the customer by providing solutions towards equity, sustainability, community engagement, and policy planning. She hopes to promote her knowledge and skills into a new role directly working with diversity, equity, and inclusion. We look forward to having this conversation with our panelists, which include Monique Jones, Steve Rosenthal, Dr. Oni Omoregie, and Robin Jackson. Monique Jones is a human resource professional and has provided proven success in the roles of human resource specialists and human resource generalists. A few of her accomplishments include successfully leading and managing a staff of 125 manufacturing employees, as well as designing and implementing new employee training and Kaizen programs based on lean management programs, which promoted continuous improvement, cost control, quality control, and waste removal. Monique is currently the Director of Outreach and Community Engagement at the St. James Missionary Baptist Church. In this role, she oversees the outward-facing goals of the church, including a focus on hunger, homelessness, and poverty, partnerships with ministries of the church to drive outreach, and training and equipping outreach opportunities. Mr. Steve Rosenthal is a third-generation Indianolan. Both his grandfather and father instilled a sense of responsibility to community involvement by giving back to the community through volunteering and many social and civic programs. Rosenthal holds an industrial engineering degree, operated his family's department store for 28 years, and has managed and owned commercial and residential real estate in Indianola for the last 35 years, working to improve housing for moderate to low income households. As mayor, Rosenthal has personally was personally involved in bringing several national chains to Indianola, as well as the many private businesses, increasing available jobs and the tax base in Indianola. Mr. Rosenthal has served in several board leadership positions and currently is the executive director of the Sunflower County Economic Development District. Dr. Oni Omoregie is a highly educated professional with experience in the finance, administration, and nonprofit sectors. He received his public policy and administration doctorate from Jackson State University and has worked in numerous fields. He has the knowledge and foresight to achieve success that lifts others and creates a lasting legacy. His skills include financial advising, business plan assessment and creation, program management, business workshops, grant and loan acquisition, policy analysis, and business training. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Breakthrough Pioneers. Robin Jackson was born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi, and is a policy and advocacy professional, an entrepreneur, and a motivational speaker. A graduate of Jackson State University with a degree in political science, she has established herself as a skilled political strategist and entrepreneur. She is the CEO and founder of Regal Empowerment Enterprise, a community organization whose goal is to change the world through inspirational testimonies, service, and faith-based empowerment. Known for her unwavering passion and commitment to empowering women in marginalized communities, Robin is celebrated as a woman on the rise. Beyond her professional endeavors, she is also a devoted mother, sister, spiritual companion, and friend, deeply rooted in her community. Robin is currently the Director of Policy Advocacy and Movement Building at the Mississippi Black Women Roundtable. Thank you all so much for being here today. Shequite and Amanda, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. From the bios, we have a wealth of knowledge that's about to just pour into everybody. So I'm excited about today's conversation. So just starting off, and this is for everybody. And if I have to, I'm open to repeating anything because it's a lot to take in. So how does home ownership uniquely impact intergenerational wealth in rural Black communities? And what obstacles have you all identified to be an issue? Can each of you kind of share a success story or give an example from your work that you've foreseen? We can start off with.
Yeah, I'll start off.
Mr. Rosenthal.
I'm used to talking. Well, you know, so many times low-income families struggle to build up assets. And the biggest asset of any family is their residence, where they stay. So at the earliest stage possible, if they can start making payments rather than rent, they're building wealth month by month by month. There's all kinds of advantages by having a home and paying towards it that a lot of people take it for granted. Oh, I'd just rather rent and not have to worry about it. But 20 years, 30 years down the road, when you can't work, can't come up with other monies, and struggle to pay rent. So all of a sudden, people become homeless because of lack of preparation. So if we're going to build wealth within these communities, financial education and getting that out there to understand that ownership is so much more important. As a landlord, I can tell you, people can be put out at any given time. So to get yourself out of that risk, you need to start having home ownership. And that's where, you know, generational wealth becomes a reality. When that family, the patriarch and matriarch may pass away, the next generation inherits that wealth. And as long as they protect it and take care of it, you can grow it. So I push financial literacy to be the starting point for people to understand the benefits rather than taking the easy way out and just paying X amount of dollars in rent.
Thank you so much for that. Which one would like to go next, Dr. I'm
Yeah, I
ready.
want to piggyback off that because when it comes to economics, that was my main point of interest here. So I know there in rural Black communities, especially, there are several unique obstacles to home ownership and intergenerational wealth building. So, and I want to talk about the historic discrimination and land loss, the legacy of discriminatory policies such as redlining, racial covenants, and the seizure of Black-owned land through mechanisms like the Mississippi Plan, and that happened with post Reconstruction landowners. And I also want to talk about the limited access to capital. Many residents in rural Black communities face difficulties assessing affordable credit, loans, and mortgages, which is often due to lower credit scores and a need for more banking infrastructure in rural areas. I definitely want to emphasize the importance of bringing those banking infrastructure to the rural areas so we can help with the historic economic marginalization of those rural areas. And I want to talk about rural infrastructure and zoning challenges. Rural communities, including those in Mississippi, often struggle with inadequate infrastructure, poor road maintenance, limited public services, and lack of access to utilities. So making owning and maintaining a home more challenging because of those aforementioned problems. Additionally, as I said earlier, zoning laws in some rural areas can restrict affordable housing development, which is further limiting those homeownership opportunities. So we know there's just a couple, unfortunately, unique obstacles to building up that intergenerational wealth and home ownership, but the importance of doing so, it helps tremendously. And to answer your other part of your question with the unique antidote, so I want to say I've worked with a young couple, first time home buyers, and I've been helping them obtain the information and knowledge necessary to purchase their first home, and they're planning to do so next year.
Awesome. Awesome.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. That was a lot to take in, but we do appreciate that. Gotcha. Robin or Monique, which one?
I just want to speak briefly, and I want to say ditto to both of the speakers because I know that financial literacy means everything. I owned my first house at 21 years of age, and so did a couple of my coworkers, but I knew that I wanted to provide a stable foundation for my family. So I was intrinsically involved in understanding not just financial literacy, but the benefits of homeownership. And that's something I kind of delve into because a lot of people don't understand equity and building generational wealth because sometimes we're drowning so that you can't see above the top of the water. You can't see your way out. I have been on housing before, I've been on food stamps before, but I can tell you I can create steps to say, what's next? What can I do next to get out of housing? What can I do next to build my credit? What can I do next? Because I'm a mother of 7, grandmother of 9, I want to leave something for my children's children. And when we think as a visionary, what can I do to create a foundation, not just for me, for my generation, we start thinking different, but that's a mindset change that has to happen around home ownership.
That's awesome. And Monique, you look awesome. 9 grand. Oh my God. All right. Awesome. All right, Robin.
Yes. So I just kind of wrap that up, and I agree with all of our panelists on the obstacles that we are seeing when we are wanting to see home ownership in rural communities. But it makes me think about the policy advances that are lacking in Mississippi when we look at wages. When Mr. Steves talked about when we're looking at a low wage income, looking at the opportunity that minimum wage in Mississippi is $7.13. We understand and know that, being able to obtain these resources and these particular things in order to obtain that economic security is one of these obstacles. So a lot of the things that we do in our work at Mississippi Black Women's Roundtable is we try to look at what particular things could we assess inside a community to help Black women specifically to increase their economic security so that they can own homes. And I would like to share a story about that because one of the things that we don't talk about is losing of Black homes and Black land. We had a mother who actually, did not know that her grandfather had left land to her and her family because it was put away in a will that she had never seen and had never come into contact with. The land had been sitting for so much long of a time, and she actually lost the land. And so we went through the particular processes with her of actually trying to figure out how to retain that land. But one of the things that we understood is that with the low wage income, obtaining that land based on funding after it had been sold was one of the hard and difficulties of that. So although there are, so many things that we would like to do in community to better, educate community about financial literacy, and then also looking at the particular historical context, there are still policies that are preventing these things from going forward, even if the resources are, in front of people where they can actually obtain them. So there's a streamline of things that should be changing and shifting so that we can increase home ownership.
Wow. So I heard the majority talk about policy. And Robin, you kind of went into the second part of my question, because I wanted to ask, with you all have a wealth of knowledge and information. So in terms of local organizations and communities and the community members, how can they collaborate effectively to close that wealth gap and support Black home ownership? And are you all currently in your organization doing any work of that nature?
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Shequita. It goes back to our Women's Economic Security Initiative. And we basically say women because that's the work that we do. But when we look at the scope, we look at it from a family dynamics. We know that in Mississippi that, most of our working families, especially those with single family household, are headed by women. And so we're looking at about 50%, 56% specifically of women being head of the household. So when looking at those particular things, the number one thing that comes to mind is how likely are individuals, our community participants, able to obtain home ownership based on their economic security. And so going back to the particular things that we discussed with the low minimum wage and also a very, very small opportunity for job development and job workforce, especially in rural communities, we see these things have to be fought on a policy level where we are doing particular work to increase workforce development that is happening inside a particular area so that homeowners can actually obtain the wealth needed in order to do so. One of the things that Mr. Steve spoke of, and also Monique, is that it is a mindset shift that has to happen to be able to bridge together these policies and these resources. So here at our organization, we lead a Mississippi Economic Security Initiative, which looks at the 4 components that actually make a homeowner economically secure in order to obtain the resources that they need in order to buy a home. So that looks like, are you able to work a job that is paying you a living wage of $17 or more in this society? Are you able to go to work freely at your own will without having to think about those particular things of childcare and where your family particular things are going to go? And then also looking at how well and how healthy are our working class in order so that they can obtain that. And that looks at how are we promoting healthcare. One of those things also include into the community aspect. So when you think about economic development, one of the things that people often think about is, oh, how much can we get businesses to come into a particular area? But we never think about how do we get businesses to come into a particular area with the quality of workers. And so our goal is to be able to increase home ownership by ensuring that our community is actually where they need to be financially, mentally, but more importantly, that they also have that education that comes around that particular literacy. So any policy that is increasing the minimum wage, any policy that is eliminating the sub-tip minimum wage in Mississippi, any policy that is putting money back into the pockets of families, those are the policies that we are focused on and moving forward, because we know that that is the first step in order to get people into the right place so that they can be economically secure for a home.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. Does anyone else have anything to add in terms of what the current organization that you all do work with, what are y'all doing in order to kind of collaborate with the community to bridge those gaps?
Well, to piggyback on Robin and, impoverished communities, and Mississippi Delta, we know, is made up of a lot of impoverished communities. One thing that I see, and again, to piggyback on Robin, is have employable skills.
Yes.
I know as mayor, I work with a number of youth organizations and spoke to the youth to get them to understand that, you know, it's great if you want to go to college, but if you want to go right to work, you have to have employable skills. So I worked with the CAP Center, which is our technology training center here in Indianola, as well as MDCC, which is our community college, to get the young people to understand that that is not a negative if you go to a community college or you take a skill type training. And I hope that somewhere in the near future that people will quit looking at that as a lower level. No,
Yes.
so many of these skills, and especially the ones that are in great demand, air and heat, water and sewer, plumbing type product skills, are in high demand and earn a lot of money. So I hope that we'll continue to push young people to understand that that's a very positive, that as I used to tell the young people that I was working with, that's 2 cars in the driveway type of money. That if you have those skills, that you can overcome the situation that you're in. Because I find so much with the people I'm dealing with, there's a sense of hopelessness. And until you can get that sense of hopelessness behind them with some minor successes, I mean, the only way to get rid of it is to create steps to have successes. And that's what I've always tried to work towards, is give them an opportunity to have those first step successes.
Well, I do appreciate you, Steve, for uplifting technical programs, because for one, I have a brother who does not have a degree, but he works on a farm and does some of their engineering work. And I can promise you his salary is better than mine. And, you know, I'm sitting up here with a PhD. So I really hope the right people are able to go back and look at this webinar, because there's some really great information. Thank you.
I wanted to speak
Ani,
briefly.
Monique.
Yeah, I just want to talk briefly. Churches are a trusted pillar in our communities, and what we've done as one of the largest and oldest churches, 159 years, is we continue to partner with banks, we partner with credit unions, and we partner with Habitat for Humanity. We've housed individuals through Habitat, and we have 2 more that we're planning to work on housing, but I also work with the local city. I work with the mayor, and I work with our county to see what funding is available and what programs are available to help individuals get into housing. But it's all because we are that trusted pillar in the community.
Thank you. Almost like a resource hub, or not being a gatekeeper, sharing information. Thank you. Okay, Ani.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback off the 3 of our other panelists, and just want to talk about something that we do at Breakthrough Pioneers is training and workforce development. And I want to emphasize developing local leadership. And I think that's important, because not only do we want to aim for individuals to be more successful in their communities, we want the individuals to work together to create more success that will basically create a new floor for the community as a whole. And I believe developing local leadership development programs will allow us to invest in leadership programs to train local communities and members to take on roles as housing advocates, financial counselors, and policymakers. This will encourage and empower people within the community to take the leadership roles necessary to advocate for the community as a whole, and to ensure that the needs and desires of the community are directly represented. This will also kind of go in towards engaging youth in community planning. So encouraging young people to get involved early and forcefully in discussions about housing and community development. This can foster a long-term perspective on building sustainable homeownership and preserving Black wealth for future generations, which is something I know is important to everyone here on this call.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. I'll let Amanda take the next question.
Hey everybody, excuse me, I lost my voice over the weekend watching the Arkansas-Texas game. So yeah, it was a little rowdy, but I'm Amanda Beard. I work for Walmart. I've been with Walmart for 11 years. I do all the design work for our remodels and super centers and neighborhood markets for a little while, but now I'm specifically under neighborhood markets. And a little bit of background, my education background. I went to A&T for my bachelor's in landscape architecture. I got my master's at Jackson State in urban regional planning. So this is something that's dear to my heart because I grew up in a historical Black community, and I've seen the home I grew up in get torn down and got built over top with townhouses that look nothing like what I grew up, right? So that's like a sign of how our communities start to gentrify and turn different, and then it pushes us out to everything else.
Yes.
But enough about me. I want to get y'all this because I know we have time. But the next question is, what role does community engagement play in promoting home ownership and equity, particularly within the church and local institutions? So Monique, would you like to speak on that for us?
Yeah, I want to say that homeowner and equity empowers our community, and we want them to take those steps towards owning homes. But I also want to talk about getting them involved. I think Dr. Oni said it, and I wrote it down, developing them in the church's local leadership. I'm going to tell you, most of us, our first time we ever spoke was in the church. They made us get up and they made us say our Easter speech. But we got to continue to develop them as they grow. I have an 18-year-old that has special needs. And you know what she told me at 18? She wants to own her own tiny home, but I want to make that happen. That starts early. That starts early in our community of getting them in workshops and seeing themselves in housing. So it's instrumental as we continue to develop the children, the youth, the millennials coming up to see themselves. Some people just see themselves as renters, but how do we change that vision for them? And that's putting them in those leadership roles. That's taking them to the county meetings or the city meetings where they're making the recommendations around zoning and making recommendations around tiny housing being building, so they can say, oh, this is something I can see myself owning. And that's where we really need to start.
Yeah, I can agree with that too. Is because it started with me in my home. Like I grew up with my grandmothers, my uncles, my aunts. So we were a community, and then down the street were my cousins, my aunts. So we grew up as a family in the same neighborhood. So what I know is just family, and outside of that, but just visitors. So and that's where a lot of my heart is because I grew up as a family in a home, and that more makes me want to own a home later in life because I grew up in a home. And a lot of people would, wish to have a home because they were in a broken home, but my home wasn't broken. So the home was full of love and community, and that makes me want to branch off and want people to have the same thing, whether it was broken or not. So, starting off in the home with the children makes a big difference. So I appreciate that.
Yes, it does. And I know, and I'm gonna address this question to Steve, but the rest of you feel free to chime in if you like. I just know he's done a lot of work in Indianola, and we've had some work done in one of our subdivisions with new homes coming up. In Indianola, we have a railroad track, and my daughter actually did like a documentary on it that before we had these new houses built, it basically separated the whites and blacks on this side of on the track, and it's still separated by race. But what we're seeing now are more homes coming up in these rural areas of the town that looks nice, that's equipped with, the dishwasher and the different appliances that we don't typically see in Black homes. And so I wanted him to speak on the historical and systematic barriers, such as discriminatory lending practices that's continuing to affect Black communities in rural Mississippi, and what solutions are being done in order to stop that.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. And of course, so much around the Delta, that storyline that you just gave is so prevalent in the Mississippi Delta. Not just Indianola, but just about every small town in the Delta has some storyline like that.
Mm-hmm.
As Dr. Oni talked about, the housing restrictions and the laws of where people could live. And we always know when they say people, we know that they're talking about.
Right.
So the project that Shequite is talking about, there was some funding to upgrade low-income housing. We're fortunate that our housing authority is pretty aggressive on trying to raise their quality of offering to low-income families. When I was first elected in 2010, I battled the director of that agency because she had the wrong mindset of what her reason for being there was. She thought that the grading point was how much money she could generate and how many grants she could get, whether it benefited the tenants or not. So there came a change of guard about 2 years after that, and we became a working team on trying to recreate the housing authority. And they started really looking at what our mission is. And the previous director had allowed a section of town, which is on the south side, it's called Southgate. It was subsidized housing, but one, they were built inferiorly. They were poor quality homes. Typical home has a minimum of 2x4 walls.
Your volume.
You can't hear me? They had 2x2 walls. I mean,
Is it me or can anyone else hear him?
let me see if I can turn it up.
I can hear it.
It's okay.
Okay, it may be me.
I'll turn
I'm
it up.
sorry.
How's that? But the quality of homes that were built were shoddy at best. And they were built in 2010. They were all a minimum of 25 to 30 years old. And they were charging what was considered way above rent. Again, they were the owners of these homes. So again, the previous director, again, was her margin of excellence was how much money she could make, and that's not what they're there for. So anyway, long story short, in 2021, I worked with a local contractor and partnered him up with our housing authority. And the two of them had a partnership, was able to get a $12 million grant to upgrade 65 of those homes. And what they did is they took them back down to the studs. The ones that had the smaller studs, they rebuilt them. And they all have high efficiency central air and heat. They all have LED light fixtures. They came with high efficiency washer and dryers. They had architectural shingle roofs. It was the type of home that anybody that was living in it would be proud to be there.
Yes.
The grant that they were able to get maintains the yards. Now, again, there were certain guidelines that you had to abide by to protect the neighborhood, but they weren't so restrictive that you couldn't live your life and enjoy life. So it really changed that whole atmosphere of that neighborhood. So it's really makes a big difference when you have homes that people, whether they're buying them or renting them, that they can be proud of. Because again, that shifts that hopelessness one step away and have it in the rearview mirror rather than what you're looking forward at.
Yes. And I think it has a lot to do with changing the trajectory. I'm sorry, Robin,
No.
of how our youth go out of the homes, going into the schools, their behavior and so forth. So there was just one thing as a community member I was proud of and I wanted to uplift. But I would love to hear from Robin too, because you're more so in the urban areas,
Yeah.
Jackson. So yeah, if you can kind of chime in.
Yeah, and I wanted to chime in and just kind of correlate between what you said and highlight one of the great aspects of what Mr. Steve just described was partnership and community involvement. With a lot of the grants that we see come, especially if they are coming from a federal government or any form of block granting, one of the things that I think is important to share on this call is that most of those grants have some form of comment, area or comment time period for the people who live in which that community in which those dollars will serve. I think that it is very important for us to start being a part of that process. The things that Mr. Steve just talked about being included, from the LED lights to the way that the central air and heat, those things can be written inside of the way that the grant is actually done. In Gulfport, Mississippi, I just recently ended up being the consultant of the community, as we would say, for some HUD Block grants funding that would increase basically the way that they are wanting to revitalize old homes in the Gulfport area. And so what's happening is kind of like what we see in Denali and also in Jackson, Mississippi, is that usually development starts in one pocket of a city before it goes into the other places. And so when looking at that, oftentimes you will see city officials want to put certain funding into those places where the economic development is happening. And so what the community did instead this time is they actually went in, looked at the dollars, and presented a budget to their mayor about how they felt that money should be spent, not specifically just to the place of the economic development, but also to the particular places that it could be used in order to revitalize some of the old homes that some of the older people in the community were actually obtaining. And so when we are talking about these areas of development, it's always important that if we are in the community and of the community, that we are also sitting at these tables where decisions are being made. And this helps us to be able to further advocate for the things that we want to see when these fundings are given into us. We talk about gentrification, and one of the biggest things about that is we're never at the table when that conversation comes up. But now that we have an understanding that we can be at the table when development happens, it gives us an opportunity to shift the way that is actually brought to our communities.
I love that. And if you don't have a seat, go take a seat.
That's right. Right. You get like the planning committee meetings are absolutely free and they're public to you. So if you don't know that your community is having a public hearing, you have a right to open your mouth and tell them that this is not what we want here. Especially like, not to off track, but here in Fayetteville, Arkansas, there's a historical Black community, and the city wanted to, try to move. It's like a historical church there.
Mhm.
That's me. That's me. Yes.
Yeah. And look, we were out here getting signatures, because what you're not gonna do is tear history down.
That's right. Erasure.
Speak, Amanda.
History that we made, that we implanted, that helped everybody through the community. Like you said, Monique, like the church helps everybody, from like children to adults to people with disabilities. Like we are not a monolith, and everybody needs help, regardless whether it's financial or it's social. We come in all different types of capital: intellectual capital, financial capital, and economic capital. It's like, and most important, especially when it comes to Black people, we are like the biggest intellectual capital there is.
Yes.
Okay. Like, the people don't think we're smart. Like we're the ones that do all your trading skills, because at one point when we had to get our jobs, most of our jobs were what? Trades, right?
Trades.
So when they stopped giving us those jobs, what we had to go do? Oh, now you got to get an education. But we couldn't go to school, right? Okay.
Right.
So that cycle that a lot of the systematic issues and policies that come in place started with trying to keep us out and getting a lot of the accessibility to homes and things. So Robin, that was on point with what you said. I really appreciate that. And then Monique, the church, a lot of our community is like at the heart of the church as well. So that
I just want to speak to what Robin said. I'm grateful that the pandemic forced some of these organizations to put these public meetings online. Otherwise, they're closed meetings. We didn't have access. We didn't know how to find it. They kept moving the needle. But now our Fayetteville City Council meetings are online. Our commission meetings are online. You can join via Zoom. You can join the county meeting, and just letting our community know you can jump in and still make a comment about what's happening, and you don't have to be present. I have an issue with public meetings lasting 11, 12 o'clock at night. To me, at some point when public transportation is no longer running, it's no longer a public meeting. If you have a child and you got to get them in bed for school, is that really a public meeting? But I'm grateful that Zoom offers us the opportunity to be able to attend those meetings now.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
And if I could piggyback on Monique, another problem I see with government meetings is they always start them at an inopportune time for people
Yep.
who are working. I mean, you know, if you start the meeting at 9 in the morning and go till 12, how many people that work and are truly interested have the ability to be able to see it? You know, start it at 5 o'clock and stop at 8. You know, like you say, working families have to take care of family business. Kids have to be taken care of and help to make sure the homework's done properly, and those kind of things. But the timing of meetings is intentional.
And I think those are intentional. I think a lot of those,
Yeah.
the setting of times and different things like those are intentional tactics to keep the right people out of those settings. So I appreciate people like you all being in seats to make those decisions and speak on our behalf and advocate for folks like us, and, you know, speak on our behalf and, you know, do things like that, because a lot of times it's not that we don't want to, it's just that we're not given the opportunity to do so, because people, they sit back in the background and they plan out tactics as to how to keep us out. And so it's really up to us to work and do the work that we're doing now in order to be effective enough to take our seat. So, and I keep saying take our seat because Robin led an initiative that basically stated, take your seat at the table. And, you know, she spoke at the Capitol. So that's something that I've just been really being intentional about saying and doing since she did that. It was so motivating. So yes. Amanda, you can take over.
Thank you guys. That was good. Donnie, did you want to say anything before we move on?
Robin, anybody else?
I think everybody covered it pretty much.
Okay, good. But you know, well, while we're on the subject of Black empowerment, Dr. Ani, what strategies would you suggest to empower Black community members to take active roles in home ownership and advocate for policy changes that support long-term community investment?
Okay, so great question first. So there are a couple of strategies that can be employed to empower Black community members to take active roles in home ownership and related policies. And I believe these strategies should focus around education, community organizing, and advocating for systematic changes that promote equitable access to housing and financial resources. So I would first go with financial literacy and home ownership education. There's no point in trying to skip this step. We need to first teach these individuals through workshops and training, and these workshops should be offered hopefully free, if not free, at low cost, so they can educate community members about financial literacy, and including how to manage debt, improve credit scores, understand mortgages, and navigate the home buying process, which can be a complicated process. And with these local community organizations, and we can work with financial institutions or government programs to conduct these. And then I want to talk about community land trusts, or CLTs, and collective ownership models. And I believe by establishing CLTs, community land trusts can help communities retain ownership over land and housing in the face of the gentrification and displacement that is currently that has been ongoing in this country for several decades. In a CLT, just for anyone to know, the community owns the land, but individuals can own or rent the homes on it. And I believe this model allows for affordable housing and prevents land from being lost to market pressure. As we know, the market is constantly changing and we have to be able to adapt. And so lastly, I'm going to try to be terse. I want to talk about community organizing and coalition building again. And it's important to organize around housing justice and form grassroots coalitions that unite the residents, advocacy groups, and policymakers around housing justice issues. And so these organizing campaigns can focus on eviction prevention, affordable housing, access to capital, and then that can amplify that community's voice and influence public policy. So, and we can lastly do this with public awareness campaigns and partnerships on the national and state level with advocacy groups. And by collaborating with these organizations that focus on lower or rural areas, such as on housing rights and racial justice, we can increase the visibility of these issues and scale for advocacy efforts.
Thank you. I like how you mentioned having access to literacy of home ownership. So when I was in graduate school, I actually did a model for my research paper of how people of color or people of low income had the ability to own a home, and they had what they had to do. They had to follow like this year. I think it was like I did a year of like literacy school where they had to know what home ownership is, what taxes they get taxed on their houses, the different different type of communities that may have like certain restrictions or things like that, and then they had to stay in their home within a certain amount of time before they were allowed to like lease it back out. So a big problem that with us, because we didn't have access to a lot of educational things, was the resources to know what it meant to own a home. And a lot of people end up losing their home because of the financial part of it, because a lot of the world is home burden. And to be home burden, a lot of your finances have to be 30% more of your income. So people with two incomes are still struggling to own a home. So, having the education behind that definitely serves a big purpose in owning a home. So I thank you for that.
Well,
Perfect. So I can move on to the next question. And this is for everyone. All of my questions seem to be targeted toward everybody. I just love y'all. So the next one, if the community members are interested in becoming advocates, because I think a lot of times folks don't really understand what advocacy work really is. And I'm looking on social media, and the more and more I look, I'm like, y'all doing it. You just don't know what it is actually. So what steps would you all recommend to get them more involved in policy change and community development for homeowner equity? Just normal people. Like, what could the organizations that you all work for, the personal work that you do in the community, what are some steps that could be provided to regular people like myself on how to become advocates around the home ownership and equity?
Well, and I don't remember who brought it up, but we all know that the church is the most integral part in our impoverished areas. And I believe that if you're really going to be a great advocate, starting in the church, you can find more team members so much easier. Social media has its good points, but one-on-one, face-to-face is, to me, the way you can make change, because so many people look at social media, oh, they're just complaining about anything and everything. But when you get together with groups, and most people are comfortable telling how they feel when you're in a church situation. So many times, a lot of people would like to be an advocate, but they're more reserved. But they can learn the skills by dealing with people who have already become a true advocate. You learn by experience. My wife always says, a mistake is just a lesson you haven't learned. You take advantage of other people's mistakes when you partner with them. So I always tried as mayor to partner with different churches when we were doing training programs or just FYI type meetings. I used to get complaints from different people who would say, well, you're just meeting to me. No, everybody left with new information. Did we make major decisions? Maybe not. But everybody left with something to think about and maybe something that they could take on themselves to do. So I look at the churches to be the start of it. It can grow as other organizations, because I'm sure all of you have worked in other organizations before you help create a wonderful organization that you currently operate. So I would love to see more empowerment given to the churches. It would help the communities much better.
I love what Dr. Rosenthal is saying, and what I want to add to that is creating safe spaces where you can meet. That's huge. I mean, I've seen people say, well, we'll have a meeting at the county courthouse. We'll have a, which is connected to the jail. That's not a safe space for everybody to go to the meeting.
Right.
I'm just being, I mean, if we want people to come out, and that is a safe space for individuals to meet and partner with other local organizations to have meetings is at the church. We have fellowship halls, we have classrooms, we have Bible study, and that we could also host those meetings in, which makes our community feel safe to come in and listen to someone. Also creating that relationships. I'm gonna say, the mayor doesn't always come into our church until it's time to vote for him. And then we don't see him again. That's not what we want. True relationships are building communication over time where it's a give and take. It's not come in and preach to us and leave. It's coming in to build that foundation around, hey, I trust you. I trust the information you're bringing to us is true and correct. And I now want to get involved with things I see you involved with. But that starts with building relationships at that ground level.
Thank you so much for pointing that out. And I especially love the relationship piece, you know, being intentional about building it across time and not just when there's a need. Yes.
Right.
Would you like to expand on that, Robin? I see you off mute.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one of the things that I think is important, especially, you know, having the church, and it makes me think of the opportunity of something that we should be doing. And it's actually knowing your worth. And so often we use that as like, oh, we are talking about like knowing your physical worth or your personal worth. But when we're looking at economic development and home ownership and where we're wanting to go, I think that it's always important that we have a understanding of the economic landscape of where we are. And so for a community advocate or a person that's wanting to be involved, I would say that one of the first things to do is to Google and do a little research about the worth that is actually around you when we're thinking about economic development. How much are homes in your area? How much is land in your area? What is the attainability of being able to do that? What are those particular resources? One of the things about being an advocate is that when we are inspired and educated with knowledge, it makes it easier for us to go into safe spaces, as Monica talked about, as Monique talked about, and collaborating with the church, as Mr. Steve talked about, because we understand what the worth is of that community that we're wanting to change. And so I would say that to just start, if this conversation is like, oh, I need to be looking at what needs to be done, go and Google the net worth of that community. Go and look at how those houses are looking. Go and look at who are the particular people that are invested in it. Because if you look at who's invested in it, then you'll be able to see what the dollar sign is for that particular place. One of the other things that we don't often talk about is building up the industry that builds homes. Where are we looking at minorities owning construction companies? Where are we looking at of minorities owning development companies? What are the particular things that we are doing when we are pulling together that trade aspect, pulling together that community aspect? It looks like getting people who are already doing the work to do the work in our communities to obtain these particular contracts. So there are various of ways that people can be activated, whether that's starting a construction company, if you're already doing the work, knowing your work to be able to have conversations with your legislators and community advocates, about what's coming into your area, and then also looking at the possibilities. Don't feel bad about looking at what's happening in places or communities where you engage with the environment. A lot of times I'll use an example of Gluckstadt in Madison, Mississippi. Before Gluckstadt became what it was, Madison was what it was looking at to be the place that it desired to do. And so what they did was they looked at what they liked about Madison and what they didn't like about Madison, and that is how they ended up coming up with the zoning areas, what house price points are going to be in that particular area, what businesses are going to be able to come into Gluckstadt. So knowing your word, doing a little education about what's going on in that place, and then go out there and find some contracts. Like, it's time for minorities to be the ones that are the developers and the contractors. We could be advocates in that way too.
Girl, you got me
that.
about to jump out my seat.
I know I was about to say, 'cause-
Especially,
yeah.
especially when you talk about minority-owned construction companies actually going out and trying to get access to different bids and different things like that. I think there can be some work around teaching them how to do that, because sometimes they just don't know. Another thing I like that you said is, and you didn't say it in this particular way, but taking policies or taking ideas from others, like sistering counties, and mirror what they've already done, especially if you can find a similar county with the same amount of people, the same demographics, and take something that worked well for them and implement it within your county, even if it's some things that you make changes in to fit your culture. Like, that's so vital. Like, why try to fix something that's not broken? Like, if you can borrow from another county, I think that's something that we could really get away with utilizing a little bit more. And so thank you. Dr. O, I have not heard from you. Would you like to expand?
Yeah, sure. So I'll piggyback off Robin's economic point and talk about making community organizing affordable. So there are probably a number of individuals that are either homebound or they lack the mobility to get to the locations that we ask for them to show up and have their voices heard. And I do think one way that we often forget is to focus on those people as well, because their voices are just as important as everyone else's voice. And getting and just opening that door allows for so many more people to show up. And when we have more people showing up, our voices altogether get stronger. And the community, when the community is stronger, the community wins. So my big point would be just making community organizing affordable. And there are a number of ways to do that. But I don't want to get into numbers right now and bore everybody. But like, no, that's what I would point on. So, but no, everybody did such a great job on that question. So thank you all.
But I just want to add one thing is holding our government entities accountable. When they get these federal contracts, there's a portion of those contracts that's supposed to be offered to minority and women-owned businesses. And a lot of time we're not holding their feet to the fire. I've called my county and my city officials and said, do you have access to the list? And they even asked me, well, what list? Where's the accountability in you having that list of available of minority vendors in construction that could be supported through the development that we have in our communities?
That's deep. And I know this is kind of off topic, but that's just individuals that's in these particular positions knowing what it entails, understanding what they can and cannot do and what they're supposed to be doing for the community. So yeah, I like that.
Wanted to just plug in right here, just in case there are any federal people who would look at contracts and looking at ways to get minority, especially women, into the construction industry. There is an association called the National Women in Construction Association that has over 300 Black women, minority women that are actually focusing specifically on construction work across the country. So if you are looking for some bad sisters that's doing the work, go and look up NWIC and plug them in. And then one of the great things, and I thank you so much, Monique, for saying that, because one of the things that we know that the labor force, the federal labor force agency is doing adding something called equal opportunity community coalitions. And so what that means is that, like in Mississippi right now, we have a corridor project that's happening on I-10, and we also have a project that's happening between Yazoo and Bentonia. And so what happens is that community organizations like Mississippi Black Women's Roundtable, we sit at the table with those those who have the contract, and we talk to them about how they're hiring. We talk to them about how much money they're paying. We talk to them about how far in the radius of where this particular project is, how far are you going to get people, because oftentimes when we look at contractors coming into the state of Mississippi, they're bringing folks from outside of the state when there are more able people within 5 to 7 mile radius that could do the working. And so being on this committee as a community organization, now we get to give you the data of what's actually happening. I get to connect you to the people that are looking for jobs, and we are making forth, a transition right there. And that is being done by the federal government through the labor force, task force. So those are some great things that are happening in our area, and we just need to be more involved into those particular processes.
Yes,
that was very strong, Robin, and that goes to how we are trying to break down those barriers and providing the opportunities for us to get into those sectors of where we're not necessarily seen to be at. So, having the construction, having the planning, having, things like that. That's really, and then shout out to Black women. I just gotta stop and say, shout out to Black women. What? A group of Black women doing construction, that is amazing. And I just love us, as a whole. So, as we break down those barriers, we can also tackle those practices that affect us. And hopefully we can come up with solutions, which leads to our next question. How do historical and systematic barriers, such as discriminatory lending practices, continue to affect Black communities in rural Mississippi or Arkansas, because Monique, and what solutions are being proposed? You want to go, Robin, since you're in Mississippi? Shout out to Mississippi too, because I got love for y'all since I went to school there.
Yeah. One of the things that I would say is that when we, and I'll speak of it from the policy standpoint, because I know that financially, when looking at lenders and all of those particular things, and then also with zoning, there are a lot of discriminatory practices that happen. But currently about subsidies, when we go to the Mississippi legislature and the legislature puts in particular things, what most people would call, depending on how you view this particular thing that I'm going to say. Some people will call it welfare and others will call it subsidies or supplements. And so what we find is that when certain subsidies and supplements are given from our legislator that are to impact home ownership or to impact economic development, it is not geared towards those that look like me, that look like most of us on the call, that look like it's, you know what, and I will be completely honest, it is not geared towards anyone that makes any form of a low wage or any moderate wage income. And so when we see these policies come down, it gives us a disadvantage of being able to actually obtain what one would say would be access, but being that these particular things are not inclusive to our communities, to those that look like us, to our to people that are making low wages, that are making moderate wages, we have to ask ourselves, then who is it for? If we are only seeing subsidies for that of the those developers, of the economics portion, then that is systematically a problem. And the solution to those particular things is to actually look at the policies that are coming through our legislation as it relates to home development. The Mississippi State Legislature just had a joint committee hearing with the House and the Senate about housing on Tuesday. And that conversation was strictly around the fact that, although we know that there's a housing crisis in Mississippi, right now we don't have homes in Mississippi. There are not enough enough buildings, actual places to put people in that would help us to be able to make sure that people have a home. And so all of that goes into redistricting, all of that goes into redlining, and all of those discriminatory things. And so even if these resources and things are happening on a federal or government level, if there are exclusions for the people who need it the most, then it's a problem.
Anybody like to piggyback off of that?
I love that she's talking about that. And I even want to go a little bit deeper because I do a lot of advocacy work around transitional housing for individuals that have been chronically homeless. And then when they work their way out of transitional housing, we need to be looking at permanent placement housing. Then you grow into affordable housing. The problem is there's no in between. People want you to go from, I had an organization here that sold the city of Fayetteville that we're going to create all this housing and we're going to serve 3 sectors, low income, mid income, and then upper income. But the housing started $300,000. So you're going to take somebody from coming out the projects that's paying $50 a month to a $300,000 home. Tell me how that's going to work. So we have to talk about transitioning them from low-income housing to permanent placement housing, then to maybe a permanent placement home, because that is not an easy transition for anyone. Even teaching them what it means to own a home, keeping up of the home, the utilities, the repairs, keeping your yard clean. I mean, those are things you don't even think about when you're living in housing, in public sector housing. I served on the Fayetteville Housing Authority board, and I saw how there was no plan for individuals to be transitioned out. Now, I saw how they kicked people out when they violated some of the housing rules, but did they have a plan to help them transition out of the housing authority into maybe some subsidized housing, into permanent placement housing. And that comes, going back to what you're saying, is an education piece that the church and the community need to partner with those associations with. I partner with Housing Now. My church is right across from a housing authority project. And my goal is to offer training and a safe space for talking about, how do I get out of this? I'm here, but what's my step? What's my next step strategically on how to get out of housing? What's my strategic plan to move to my next step? And this ain't where I need to be the rest of my life. This is not where you're called to be, is just in housing. But we have to know that we can't just continue to provide this housing and not tell them how to strategically move step by step. So that permanent placement housing provides, so sometimes it comes with supportive services, whether it's case management, no matter what it is, or a mentor or a life coach to walk you through. Somebody needs to help you through going from housing to home ownership.
This is
Thank
something
you.
that
Appreciate it.
I felt.
I'm listening, y'all. I'm just this busy room, so I'm trying to find a room to sit in. But yeah, the being in Bentonville, like, you know, living in Arkansas here, has been very, very, very expensive, even with the smallest homes. And they expect people to pay all this money when a lot of us don't have that type of income. And they, as it based on like the type of income here, because you know, Walmart is a big company, along with Tyson as well. So they expect all these people to have these big salaries to afford these homes, but eventually they're just going to get empty, or it's going to be a certain type of excuse me, a certain type of income that all being the same thing. So that defeats the purpose of the missing middle, right? So a lot of the people that do live here, they all, it's like a bubble. And when they're in this bubble, it's the same amount of, like, we all make 100,000 or they all make 200,000. It's not different types of people that live in these areas, and it causes like the economic bubble, which eventually pushes other people out and don't want to live here. So Monique, you know, just in this area, it's just been very, very difficult to find affordable housing. I think they started building a community in Fayetteville, right? For townhomes that look really, really nice. But again, like, what does it take to get those things if you're not making them accessible to the folks who need to, you know, to rent or buy? Dr. Anya, would you like to add on to that?
I think Dr. Rosenthal had, well, he was
Yeah,
gonna
I think
be a
he
little
did.
bit
Well,
first, but
I appreciate that title. I wish I had a PhD, but I do not. But I've got a lot of life experiences. But one thing that I was proud of an organization I was involved with about 5 years ago, and it deals with training in financial literacy. And we were fortunate enough, it was through the Mississippi Center for Justice, we received a grant to help do a number of trainings, and we partnered with one of our local banks. But what we were able to do, one, through the grant, and then two, a generous banking institution, that through our literacy courses, we were able to come up with a deal. Again, I've always looked for solutions to have small successes, let's say. During the period, and this was one of the longer financial literacy classes. It went on for a year, but we didn't meet, but twice a month. But everybody had to tell their story and what's going on. But we gave them the ability that if they saved $1, they'd open up a savings account. The bank said, it doesn't matter whether you have bad credit or whatever, we're going to open you up a savings account. And they, for every $1 you put in there and kept it in there till the end of the year, we would match it with $2. So for every $1 you saved, you got $2. Now, there was a caveat on it, is that up to $2,500, okay? Which still is substantial to get $2 on $1. But at the end of it, And and they kind of watched, and we kept telling them, we want to see your numbers going up, even if it's, a small percentage of your income. So we tried to let them know, we don't want you to strap yourself, but let's come up with a system to put X amount away. And the three caveats was that with that extra money that they gave you, so on 2,500, you got $5,000 if you reach that goal. But that 5,000, of course, you couldn't tell them what they had to do or could do with their own money, but with the money that you were given as, quote, we called it interest, but it wasn't realistically interest. But the three things you could use it on was one, more education for you or your children, or to invest in some type of business, because we spoke not only in financial literacy, but in entrepreneurship as well. Different types of businesses and that type of thing of what you could start off with very little capital to do, whether it's washing cars or mowing yards or other types of businesses. We had people who learned to make pastries and sell pastries through other local shops. They didn't have to open up a store, but they contracted with other small businesses, whether it was a restaurant or a gift shop or whatever. And then the third thing was to invest it as a down payment on the purchase of a home. So all three good opportunities, and you didn't have to do it within a certain time period. If you had that 5 and you had to build up another 5, so be it, because it stayed in there and you grew it. But I felt like to give them a goal that could be achievable. I mean, if you only saved $500, we didn't slight anybody, but you were going to get $1,000 for that 500 you saved. So then you had $1,500. So that was something I didn't speak earlier, something I was proud of. But looking back at that program, it was different than anybody else's. And it opened the door because we were teaching them how to use the money that they were growing. And I will say, most of them had 2 or more children, single parents. So we're talking mainly females. There was one male in the group of 12. But at the end of the time, all of them had at least $1,000. So we felt that we were successful in that program. We were hoping for 2,500, but we knew that was unrealistic. But we wanted to set the bar, because if we told them 500, they might have said, well, I'll do 250, So we set the bar high. But I thought that was a good, and 2 of them still, and this was 5 years ago, 2 of them are still operating businesses that they use that money to invest in equipment to start a small business.
Were those meetings held at the Center for Justice?
Yes.
Okay, my husband took advantage of it. That's how he got his first work truck.
Yeah, right. And it was great.
And
That's amazing.
Dr. Rosenthal, do you believe that your programs could transition to those same folks trying to get a loan from banks? Like what they learned from you, do you believe that they can use the same tactics to get an even bigger loan through banks?
I would think so. Now, the bank that we used, and I don't mind saying it was Guarantee Bank.
Guarantee Bank.
But you figure those 12 people built a relationship with that bank. Now, again, some banks are more community minded than others, and some banks are required to take a certain level of risk because they, and I forget the banking term, but they are allocated federally to disperse a certain amount of money to low-income families who may have a smaller or lower credit score. So yes, I think so. I'd have to check with the banker that we work with to see if any of those later became bankable people, because that was the term we kept using, that we want to create y'all to be bankable citizens, that if you get in a hardship, that you can go to the bank And I told him, I said, this is not pie in the sky, but at some point that you could get a small loan on your signature. Because there are people who are low to moderate income who can do that because of the relationship they built with that bank. So you didn't have to go to a high interest loan office, or heaven forbid, a check cashing service, because we all know the scheme with the check cashing service
Right.
Right.
is preying on people. It's not benefiting people. I tried to implement an ordinance to prevent them to come to our town. Unfortunately, I couldn't do it legally, so I tried.
Yes, I love it. We got about 15 more minutes on, and so I want to allow the audience, those that's watching, if you all have any questions, put them in the chat. And while they are putting their questions in the chat to our speakers, if there's anything that you feel that the audience needs to know that we may not have covered, but something that you think that's imperative for them to know, we would love for you all to kind of take the floor and just share. We can start with whomever wants to start first.
I'll start first if that's okay with everyone else. So I want to basically reemphasize the importance of community and working together. And I do believe that there's so much talent within these local communities, especially rural communities, and that you can go out there and start your own community workshop and just teach each other how to be better, how to be a better landowner, how to be a better investor, how to train each other, how to uplift the youth in your communities. So sometimes you don't have to wait for somebody else to come to your community. Sometimes the community has everything it needs there. It just it's untapped. So just look around. I know Robin talked about it. It's like every community has great economic value, and that economic value may not just be monetarily. It may be in skill sets and trades.
Right.
So just go amongst your community, work with each other, and just basically uplift one another. Rising tide lifts all boats.
Those other forms of
Perfect.
capital, like I spoke earlier, intellectual, social.
Yes. Different
It's
forms
not
of
just
capital.
financial.
And if I'm not mistaken, Dr. O, that's some of the work that you do, come into communities and train them how to do that advocacy work.
Yes, ma'am.
So it
we
may
do
be wise for
community.
you to drop your info in the chat. Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
utilize resources.
I'll
All
post my
right.
information in the chat for
Monique,
everybody.
Robin, Steve.
Yeah, I ditto that. I have done a lot of work just addressing housing and homelessness around the United States. And so I think Shequite said it earlier. We have to sometimes replicate what we see is already done correctly. It doesn't make sense for us to recreate the wheel. And I found that even it's an organization out of Austin that's kind of similar to the Fayetteville, Arkansas area, that they have a community where Austin gave them 40 acres of land to create a community, and it's called Community First. The one thing I love about it, they create a village of a community, and this village supports transitional housing for anyone that's homeless. But the CEO lives on staff, on site. Everybody that works there has to live in the community so it doesn't become us and them.
Wow.
That's how you take away those lines. Is if you're going to work with us, you have to live amongst us, you have to work with us, you have to be part of us as a community, because housing just does not solve homelessness. Dr. O said it, community solves homelessness. You have to be part of the community to build on that trajectory of solving it. And I can tell you, they have tiny homes, they have a mechanic on site, they have their own doctors on site, they have a garden on site, they have a workforce development on site, they even have their own cemetery on site. So when someone leaves this earth, they don't have to worry about how they're going to go and where they're going to be buried. I mean, like thinking of everything, the local transit buses run through there. If they have a 911 call, they have a nurse that call goes to someone on site before it goes to the local police department. So because some things we can resolve within ourselves, some things we need to break those systematic barriers that keeps us down. Police don't need to be involved all the time. We actually can be able to manage within our own communities the issues. And one thing I know that they had never had anybody move out. I love that somebody else said it too. Everybody there owns their own home. I think Dr. O said it, talking about, did you say COT? Is that how you said it, Dr. O?
The community land trust, CLT.
CLT. So I don't know that it's a community land trust, but I know the land was given by the state of Texas to them to do this project, and they've done so well. They gave them another 40 acres to do this. So that's true replication, because they saw it was done well. They have their own mail slots, they have their own theater to watch movies. I mean, when you see a community that has their own libraries and they can solve for housing, we have to just take out the time to replicate instead of recreating the wheel.
So they've basically created their own ecosystem.
Right, that's
Just
what community
within itself.
development is. Yep, it's an ecosystem, and we all work together. And I think I go back to Robin's point where she was saying about community-based organizations. That's a big thing, the communities too, and then having our own CDFIs, community development financial institutions. There's, now, I don't know if you know Monique, there's a guy here in Little Rock, Arlo, Washington. He had a little small documentary. Man, all he did, he saw his community. It's not necessarily with housing, but just having that connection with your community. He started off with just loaning $20, $50 to, he's a barber, he cuts hair. So he started off with just $20. He said, hey man, you know, somebody, I need this, I got you. And he said, you pay me back. Didn't charge interest. And as he made the connections and the network, more people trusted him, and more people trusted him to the point where he started his own business of having his a loan company where he would loan to his community, and they would pay. People got businesses like Shequite was saying, like her husband got his truck. People were getting their homes or paying off their cars, getting food or whatever it was. That's within the community. He didn't have to go to a bank and do that. All he did was just pretty much like crowdfunding within his people.
Right.
If we can allow us to have that trust with each other, because most of us don't trust banks based on history. You go back to FDR with the New Deal. Them banks was not loaning to us. He said the New Deal was to make a 30-year loan on houses, right? And what they did not come for us. They came from people who look, you know, had money, but they didn't have money, but they lost all their homes. And that's when he started to buy the banks back. He bought the banks back, and now he owns those. And it went to like, well, now you got to put in policies that they know they can't read. So now you got to put in policies they're not going to read, right? And then went into redlining and other things too. So, you know, having that community starting from the grassroots up will always make a difference coming from down to the grassroots.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to ask Tanner, is there any of the audience, have anybody put questions in the chat?
We do have a question. Yes. The question is, how does lack of public transportation create a barrier to owning a home?
Wow.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I think I can speak to that, even though I'm not a panelist.
Well, first of all, it hurts employment, which hurts homeownership. I mean, if you can't get to a job because you don't have dependable transportation, whether it's public transportation or your own vehicle, if you can't keep a job just because you can't get there, you know, on time and on regular periods, you'll never be able to own the home because you'll always either be behind on your notes or can't pay the rent. So transportation in the Delta is definitely a hardship. You know, we're in food deserts all around the Delta. They got to pay somebody, and you would think their buddies would be generous, but it's typical double what they should be charging them just to take them to the grocery store. So transportation really takes a lot out of a low income family's bottom line.
But you also only see public transportation in more urban areas, and like urban nodes. So, you know, like your city blocks, like Chicago, New York, things like that, bigger cities that do allow for public transportation to happen. And, you know, like rural areas, they don't have the infrastructure to support that. So if
Right.
you don't have the infrastructure to support public transportation, they're not going to have anything. That's why you got a lot of people, like Dr. Rosenthal said, they got to pay a lot just to go get their groceries. They paying more to travel than their groceries.
Right,
That's going back to what I said earlier about being cost burden. You're paying more out of outsourced resources than you are on your house. And, you know, that
Yeah.
causes people to lose their jobs or trying to pick and choose what they need to pay. Like, you shouldn't have to choose between eating and putting your lights on.
Yes.
I
I
don't care
agree.
how much money you make. If you should be able to eat and have your lights. I need you to have lights on while you eat your breakfast, okay?
That was
decisions you have to worry about.
Right.
That's a great question. So I worked for Dallas Area Rapid Transit for 10 years, and there are things that we could do, once again, as a community, to create a community van that we can pool our resources to create our own transit and means to getting places. It's been done somewhere, and we gotta find, how do we remove these systematic barriers as a community? And let's have these meetings about who all is going to the same place, to the one plant that's left open after everything's been closed. How can we make sure everybody's picked up, use this community van, and partner with the city to maybe have the city buy the van? We are paying into the gas. We have to partner with our local politicians in order to let them know this is going to help our community. This is going to drive people to go to work. This is going to bring back diversity here in our communities if we create an access to getting back and forth to work. And so there's park and rides in the larger cities, but I can tell you right now, DART has little minivans that go all around the city into areas that are a little bit further off, and we call them suburban areas, that the DART train does not go to, the DART buses don't go to. But what they do is they rent out a van to that community to make sure everybody gets to work. But that was done on federal funding. FTA has funding, Department of Transportation has funding. We just need our cities to apply for that funding when we know that there are systematic barriers that are keeping us from being able to get to work and to get to school and to eat.
Thank you so much for that, Monique. So what I'm hearing all of you all basically saying is strategizing and collaborating. That's one beautiful thing about smaller communities. And I noticed someone in the chat would like to use their audio to ask a question. If you all would please put it in the chat, just so we can keep abreast of and keep up with time, I would really appreciate it. And I see a hand held up. Could you put it in the chat?
I'd like to.
While they're doing that, I'm sorry, you had something to say, Steve?
Yeah, and I want to throw this out to the other panelists, and I'm not looking for an answer right this moment, but I want to get y'all thinking on some things that, and this has been my pet peeve. I was mayor for 12 years, and I did 4 housing rehabilitation grants. And my pet peeve in that grant application was that you had to have all your utilities in your name for at least 12 months. And I would get 150 applications. And when we got finished going through that one question at the first of it, and we always told them, you're going to be disqualified, but I would never tell them you can't fill out the application. But out of 150 applications, we would end up with 12 or 13.
Yes.
And to me, that was intentional. They put that in there to get at low income, poverty stricken areas, because they know that is a common practice and it would exclude them. And I would love to see us all become advocates to whichever agency created that little sentence that's in that policy and have it stricken from that policy. I had so many good people who otherwise would have been qualified. But that one thing, and I kept preaching after the fact, the first year, when I realized that I was in there, when they would come to fill out the application, I said, tomorrow, you change your utilities.
Yes.
In the owner's name, and 12 months from now, when I do this grant again, I'll make sure you're at the top of the list. But I can't do it if you don't do what you need to do.
Right.
So, and I did have two people who showed up 2 years later, but they had 12 months of it. And one of them did
They
get
got it.
chosen and
On Hoover.
rehabilitate their home. So it did work.
Yeah, and we are at time, you all. We basically at 1 minute, but I love the fact that we were able to leave off such a positive note. And being a part of the community at that time, I actually got to witness one of those homes coming up in the family that I knew for so long lived right around the corner from me, that grew up in poverty, be able to get a brand new home. That was just the uplifting moment and gave me so much hope. We really do appreciate everybody for attending today, and special thanks to all of our speakers. If you have any further questions, please put them in the chat. And if we are unable to answer, which we won't, we'll be sure to get it out to you all as best as we can, even if we have to email it to the individuals that spoke today. So thank you again so much, Steve, Monique, Oni, and Robin, and Tanner for putting this together. Y'all did an amazing job. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. And I hand clap to everybody that attended.